The United States is often described as having been pulled into the First World War by inevitability, by economics, by alliances, by an unstoppable sequence of events unfolding across Europe. The story suggests momentum without authorship, as if a nation simply crossed a threshold that had already been erased by history. Yet the unsettling detail is this. For nearly 3 years, the war raged without the United States. Millions were mobilized elsewhere. Borders hardened. Empires strained under weight they did not yet know how to measure. And still, the American state remained formally outside the conflict, not absent from its consequences, but restrained from its center. The contradiction rests here. If entry was inevitable, then restraint should have been impossible. If restraint was possible, then entry was not fate. Something was held, something was delayed, and something, eventually, was released. The cost of misunderstanding that release is not confined to the past. In 1914, when war broke across Europe, the United States declared neutrality, not as a gesture, but as a position enforced by policy, language, and distance. Trade continued. Banks extended credit. Ships crossed contested waters under American flags. The Atlantic remained a corridor rather than a front. At the level of institutions, neutrality required constant maintenance. Diplomatic cables were weighed, public statements calibrated, naval deployments adjusted without escalation. This was not passivity. It was management. The question was not whether the war would touch American interests, but how close it would be allowed to come. Each month that passed without entry reinforced the appearance of separation. Yet separation was never complete. German submarines targeted shipping. British blockades restricted commerce. American citizens traveled on belligerent vessels. Each incident was documented, protested, absorbed. The war pressed against the boundary of neutrality, but did not break it. Until it did. The decision to enter the war did not arrive as a single moment of clarity. It accumulated through pressures that were individually containable, but collectively corrosive. Submarine warfare challenged the meaning of neutral rights. Financial exposure to Allied victory altered the stakes of non-involvement. Political rhetoric began to shift, not toward war, but toward justification. The language of restraint softened. The language of responsibility sharpened. What remained unchanged was the structure of authority. Entry into war required consent from institutions designed to delay it. Congress debated. The executive framed necessity. Public opinion was not unified, but it was guided. The choice was processed through legitimacy, not impulse. That process is often remembered as procedural. It was also psychological. The longer restraint was maintained, the more fragile it became. One tension ran beneath every argument. Neutrality had consequences of its own. Remaining outside the war did not preserve the existing order. It altered it. American industry expanded to supply belligerents. Global influence grew without formal commitment. The state benefited from distance while shaping outcomes indirectly. This created a contradiction difficult to sustain. Power exercised without responsibility invites scrutiny. Responsibility without authority invites frustration. As the war dragged on, neutrality no longer appeared as balance, but as asymmetry. The United States was increasingly implicated without being accountable. The language of leadership began to replace the language of separation. Not leadership through force, but through arbitration, finance, and moral framing. Yet those forms of leadership lacked enforcement. They depended on restraint elsewhere that no longer existed. When unrestricted submarine warfare resumed in early 1917, it was not unprecedented. It was a repetition. The difference lay in interpretation. What had once been absorbed as provocation was now treated as refusal. Refusal to recognize American presence. Refusal to acknowledge American authority. The threat was not only to lives or commerce, but to credibility. A state that asserts rights, it cannot defend, erodes its own standing. That erosion was measured internally. Each unanswered attack narrowed the space for restraint. Authority requires response. Silence, once strategic, began to look like abdication. The decision that followed was framed as defense, not ambition, protection of principles, not expansion of influence. Yet the machinery mobilized exceeded those claims. A mass army was raised, industry reorganized, civil liberties narrowed. Power, once exercised indirectly, became overt. The declaration of war did not end uncertainty, it redistributed it. The United States entered a conflict whose outcomes it could not control, but whose resolution it would help define. Authority expanded rapidly. The federal government reached into labor, production, speech. Dissent was regulated, loyalty was measured. The war demanded coherence, and coherence required enforcement. This transformation was justified as temporary, emergency powers framed as provisional, yet institutions rarely returned to prior dimensions without friction. The choice to enter the war altered the relationship between the American state and its population. Citizenship became conditional on alignment. Neutrality, once a national posture, became a suspect personal stance. The boundaries of acceptable belief narrowed. Authority clarified itself by exclusion. Across the Atlantic, American entry shifted the balance of endurance, not immediately through combat, but through assurance. Allies recalculated timelines. Germany recalculated risk. The war's horizon changed, yet the peace that followed exposed another tension. The authority exercised during war sought continuation through structure. International frameworks were proposed, norms articulated, leadership formalized, but domestic consent fractured. The same institutions that enabled entry now constrained permanence. The Senate resisted entanglement. The public recoiled from obligation. Authority without fatigue is rare. The war had expanded American power, but not American appetite for sustained governance abroad. The contradiction returned in a different form. Influence exceeded commitment. Vision exceeded enforcement. The choice of 1917 is often discussed as a turning point toward global leadership. It is also a study in limits. Authority can mobilize rapidly under perceived threat. It struggles to institutionalize restraint afterward. The United States emerged with increased capacity, but ambiguous purpose. The mechanisms built for war did not dissolve. They waited. Economic reach, military readiness, diplomatic expectation persisted. Future decisions would be made in their shadow. The war did not resolve the question of how power should be exercised. It deferred it. Each subsequent conflict would revisit the same tension between reluctance and responsibility, between declared restraint and accumulated influence. The fracture appears when the inquiry turns inward. The decision to enter the war is remembered as a response to external violation. But what if it was equally a response to internal erosion? To the discomfort of holding power without acknowledgement? To the strain of maintaining authority without expression? If restraint becomes indistinguishable from weakness, does authority eventually demand release? And if release is framed as necessity, who retains agency over its scope? The uncomfortable question lingers: at what point does a state no longer choose war, but choose to stop choosing restraint? The echo that follows does not settle. Authority operates through repetition. Each assertion reshapes expectation. Each delay alters credibility. The United States entered the First World War once, but the pattern established was not singular. Power exercised reluctantly still teaches others how it will behave under pressure. Silence communicates as clearly as speech. Delay can harden rather than soften outcomes. The choice of 1917 remains unresolved, not because its details are unclear, but because its structure persists. Restraint and authority remain in tension. And somewhere between them, decisions continue to form, not suddenly, but gradually, until they no longer appear as choices at all. If this reflection resonated with you, you can find more explorations like this on Timeless Questions. where history, power, and human nature quietly intersect.